Zoe, what is happening
What is happening
in Scotland?
Yes, good question. Well, we know that it's looking really tight for Humza Yousaf now. So the coalition between the Greens and the SNP has fallen apart. Yousaf announced his plans to cut ties with the Green on Thursday. They've had this breakdown in relations following the SNP's U-turn on its climate targets. And now we're just seeing piling in of SNPs basically calling for a no-confidence vote in the leader. And what we're seeing now
Which has been accepted. So there was a number, it needed to go past, it whizzed past it, the Labour Party got behind it, the Greens are behind it, the Liberals are behind it, the Conservatives are behind it. Actually, the official opposition in Scotland, the Conservative the MSPs. But yeah, so that is going to happen. Do we know what day it's on? It's one day next week.
Yes, I believe so. Although there's always the chance that Yousaf stands on the front foot and resigns beforehand, because who wants to see a disastrous no confidence vote?
Well, apparently he is hanging by a thread. Mr Yousaf, not useless, almost said it then. And he's made a right old mess of things, actually. Stella, do you think this is going to precipitate an early election for the Scottish Parliament?
Well, it might, because the threat that you are talking about is personified in Us Regan, the SNP MP who left the SNP to go to the Alba Party over women's rights and independence. And as Kevin Schofield said earlier, she's not the biggest fan of Humza Yousaf because he said that there is no great loss for the SNP when she left.
So I think it was October last year. She jumped ship to the Alba Party.
Yes, she defected to the Alba Party.
After the break to Neil Humvey, who's an Alba Member of Parliament here in the Westminster Parliament. And he sort of said, good riddance, bye-bye.
Yes, and apparently now, see how the tables have turned. She's the most powerful woman in Scottish politics at the moment.
Yeah, so it's always been nice to people.
J.K. Rowling
make unnecessary enemies. I say that as someone who's got innumerable enemies. I keep apparently being rude about them on this show. But, so this is really interesting. So what technically is going to happen is that there's going to be this vote. Scottish Parliament is split evenly. But if he loses, the SNP, it's a non-binding vote of confidence. Firstly, it's not like the UK House of Commons, it's non-binding vote of confidence. The SNP have then got 28 days to go and scrabble around and try and find a new leader who can unite them. They obviously had, just over a year ago now, a leadership election. Do you, Stella, know who they might go for? Or Zoe, have you got any thoughts about?
Well, obviously the second place last time was Kate Forbes, and she was, quite an influential figure in the SNP. But what's really interesting about this is it shows that the SNP is actually not a very united party ideologically. So Humza Yousaf really was the kind of heir to Nicola Sturgeon, quite progressive. He did this deal with the Greens. Kate Forbes, she's much more kind of conservative.
Oh, she's sound. Kate Forbes is sound. She's a great individual.
She's economically liberal. She's she's got quite socially conservative values, views on gay marriage and abortion, things like that. And actually, what you can see here is there's some real divisions emerging in the SNP.
So you know what? I think this is really interesting because I was listening to this sort of schism coming in the SNP this morning, and I was thinking, look, they were all elected repeatedly on a wave of let's get an independence referendum through. That unites them, that belief in Scottish independence. I don't believe in it, but they believe in it. And that's going further and further away from them. It now seems inconceivable that in the next 5 or maybe even 10 years we'll have another independence referendum. I'm a unionist, I'm very pleased about that. And then they're all sort of going, oh, well, actually, we don't agree about much else. And you know what it reminded me of? Conservative Party, my party. Because we were all elected in 2019, get Brexit done. That was the mantra that everyone marched into that election. We've got Brexit done, and then all the other stuff, we don't know particularly what we agree on. I think that's been a lot of the problems why Boris Johnson lost his role of Prime Minister and why, we've seen all these difficulties in the Conservative Party. We are now coming together, but that's why I think we've had this difficult period.
I think you can imagine Labour now really rubbing their hands together because they can, that exact attack line that you were leveraging at, the Conservatives, they can now also say the SNP are equally,
Well, it wasn't an attack, it was an analysis.
Well,
I think it's actually
your analysis, but doesn't it present the perfect attack line for Labour? They can now go to the Scottish people and say, exactly what we're experiencing in Westminster, you're experiencing in Holyrood, and the only people who can sort it out is Labour. I mean, they're going to be absolutely loving this.
I think it
Yeah, but
shows
the Labour
us...
Party hasn't done that well in Scottish elections. The Conservative Party is ahead of them in the elections, not in the polls, but in actual election results.
So I think all of this shows us how volatile British politics have been in the last few years, because I remember up until even like 2 years ago, you would talk about Scotland and say how Keir Starmer needs to win more seats in Scotland if they are to make it into the Labour government. And everyone was looking at Scotland and thinking, it's not going to be this time. It has to be it has to be the next time around. There is no way that Keir Starmer is going to be able to cover all of this ground to make it into 10 Downing Street because of Scotland. And it is because the SNP looked so strong. Nicola Sturgeon had done such a good job, and she used to, even up until like 2 years ago, she used to look like a completely indefeatable politician. And look where we are now. Her image has been completely tarnished by the scandal with her partner. And she has left, she has resigned, she has abandoned front.
Well, we're going to keep watching. I always wonder about this. The Conservative Party famously has its men in grey suits every time a Conservative leader goes off the rails, apparently. I mean, I've never seen it, actually, but they talk about these men in grey suits who go and encourage him to resign. I'm just wondering if the men in grey kilts are going to be knocking on Humza Yousaf's door today.